Thank you, the Mayor of Jerusalem, and I hope we will benefit from your optimism. I'd like to call upon the members of the panel to discuss Jerusalem, Dr. Rami Nasrallah, Dr. Tirza, Meir, Kraus, and Dr. David Koren. Please come up to the stage. We're going to discuss Jerusalem a little bit in order to clarify that all these things that we've seen actually represent the real picture of what's happening in the city.
We're going
to start while people are still coming up to the stage.
Jerusalem, Israel's capital and largest city. Visited by millions of tourists each year from around the world. A city holy to all three monotheistic religions. But also a city where different groups rarely mix. Where many struggle with poverty and lack of infrastructure and terror. July 2nd, 2014. Mohammed Abu Hadir is murdered by Jewish teens. October 22nd, 2014. Baby dies following terror rampage. November 18, 2014. 5 killed in terror attack on synagogue.
וזה באמת שאלת המושב.
This is actually the question we're going to deal with, and I just have to say that this session was prepared by Dr. Komi Michael, but he had some medical treatment. We wish him speedy recovery. He's not here, and it so happens that all the participants are my personal friends. Dr. Rami Nasrallah, he's the founder of IPCC. He deals with planning and dealing with the problems and conditions in the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem. Tirza, we served many years together in the army. He was the head of the project of the fence. He was also a member in the negotiation team of Annapolis. Continues with planning and infrastructure. Meir Kraus, the director of Jerusalem Institute for Israel Studies, a very important institute that does a lot about Jerusalem modestly. During the negotiations, we actually were assisted by his institute. He's an educator, was an educator in Jerusalem for many years. He knows it very well, both the west side and the east side. And last but not least, Dr. David Koren is defined as a consultant of the mayor regarding the relationship with the Arab citizens. Before, he was the head of the Middle East Division in the National Security Council. So I think I have a very good group here of people who know Jerusalem. The first question, the mayor gave us a very optimistic picture of a united and unifying city. Is this really the situation? Does it really describe the challenges that people face today in Jerusalem? Rami, you want to start? Be the first one. Hello, everybody. Definitely to paint a rosy picture. It's good for elections, but not more than that. The reality is very harsh. The city is collapsing. Since Oslo, Jerusalem lost its status as a metropolitan of the Palestinians, and we're talking about 370,000 Palestinians. It used to be the economic, the cultural center for services, and since Oslo, since the fence, you can see see that the city is collapsing. The private sector actually goes to Ramallah. Most of the high-tech people and the private sector actually moved to Ramallah in the beginning of the 2000s. The dropout rate from school is about 15% as opposed to 3% in the West Bank. The entire system is collapsing, and we're still talking about how nice it is to be in Jerusalem, to be a tourist, to come to festival. It's great. To eat hummus, it's even nicer, but the reality in the field is different. 22,000 houses under injunctions for demolition, or potentially they're going to be demolished. They're against the law of planning, and in spite of the very nice description, I think most of the plans were not approved, even plans that the mayor wanted himself. The court sometimes, so you have to be careful about what you depict, what you describe, because it's not only against the Israelis or the Palestinians. It can be very dangerous to the future of the entire region. Thank you, Rami. David, what do you, as a response to the picture that Rami just depicted? Hello. First of all, I welcome the idea of talking about Jerusalem, and I'll tell you about a personal story. When I entered office 4 years ago, I met with the chairman of the community administration of Beit Hamima. His name is Mohammed Masri. They call him Abu Mazen. So I said to my wife, on the first day I met Abu Mazen, of course not the real one, and he said something that keeps echoing in my head. He says, I don't envy you. You represent a non-functioning body vis-à-vis a hostile population in the most complicated place in the world. And in these 4 years, I realized that really the place is complex and challenging. The population is not hostile. It looks for the pragmatic channels, and the body which is called the Municipality of Jerusalem under the Mayor Barkat, what it does different is it takes responsibility and accountability, just as we've heard the mayor, about the situation and the managing of the daily life of the Arab inhabitants of Jerusalem. I met with the mayor. I also speak Arabic. And I met with him. The first time I asked him what actually is the core of my role. And it is to take issues that are challenging in the city, in the daily life, and to improve it. And I can say that both in the aspects of planning and building, and also education and welfare and infrastructure, not just the budget, but also the results. There's a real leap in the scope of urban activity in the Arab neighborhoods, in the method that we work in under the direction of the mayor. It's not a method of the past, of folklore. Let's have coffee, eat hummus, we'll talk to the leaders and go home and finish. We are working in a very complex method whereby I do preparation work. The mayor comes to the neighborhoods, and in polls that we held showed satisfaction, like one of 2011 of the Washington Institute, we see that there's a rise in satisfaction. The real challenge is to recognize the challenges in the city. The mayor knows them. He lives the neighborhood. I do too. To recognize the challenges, to set measurable targets, to come to the leaders of the neighborhoods and to do as best as possible to live up to our objectives. So I say that the issue of East Jerusalem, with all the strategic challenge, first and foremost is made of the 350,000 inhabitants who deserve receiving good services. I think there's a rise in the quality of services, and I think the government also issued a plan to invest 200 million shekel in advancing practical issues. And I can say that there's some sort of an image which says that there's a municipality and there are Arab citizens, as if it's two entities that are separate. But the core of the activity is to create an interface from a human point of view and a municipal point of view that says that there are inhabitants who deserves to get services, and of course strategy, which says that since you see Jerusalem as a united city, and the immediate implication of that is to act to bridge gaps, and we do, but we recognize that the gaps are still there. And just to conclude, Rami spoke about the dropouts of business people, and they go to Ramallah. One of the things that we're trying to do is to open all sorts of economic ventures within Jerusalem and a hub for high-tech industry. Maybe the controversy, it's not to characterize the problem, but I have the feeling that depends where we started and where we are today. I think in many things there's an improvement. Of course, there are other things, many other things we still have to cope with. Meir, is there any coordination between the declaration of the governments in the last 48 years of a city that was united and what is happening in practice, with all due respect, because when you walk around, you see a huge gap in infrastructure and in the way of life between the Arab neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and the Jewish neighborhoods. What is the real story with all the goodwill that we're talking about? Well, good morning, everybody. Can you dim the lights a little bit? I'm willing to tell the truth even without investigation. In order to give an answer to this real gap between the polluted words about Jerusalem and the reality, let's look at three components. One component, what did we do in 67? The second, what have we done throughout the years since 67? And the last one, what we did not do. What did we do in 67? Well, in 67, actually, the government of Israel decided to unite Jerusalem. However, the East Jerusalem, the Jordanian, the city was 6 kilometers square, and we annexed 70 square kilometers by government resolution. We increased the size of Jerusalem significantly, and we included 30 Palestinian villages that never saw themselves as part of Jerusalem. That's what we did. We annexed a very significant area, and we defined it in the municipal area. Under the aura of uniting the city, we actually annexed another territory. That's what we did then. And what happened in the 50 years that followed? What we did is a huge effort to maintain the Judification of Jerusalem by building huge neighborhoods around the city in open areas, tens of thousands of apartments. That's what we did, by the way, with a great effort, quite commendable, strategic effort. One say we didn't really manage, if you look at the result. We didn't succeed, because in 67 the percentage of Jews was 67%. Today we're talking about 63%. If the trend continues, in 2020 we're going to be under 60% Jewish. So this huge effort really didn't succeed. You can always ask what would have happened if we didn't do it. But the third thing is the most important for your question, what we did not do. What didn't we do? Anybody who wants to look and see can see it very easily. 2 kilometers from the Knesset, there is a city which is a state of third world. After 50 years, the inhabitants have partial rights. The land is not organized. There are no pavements. Around the city, almost there's no enforcement law and order unless it's really security issue. The school children do not have classrooms, and if we want to symbolize it, we can say that the sewage streams around the street into the Kidron River, which is a historical site 30,000 cubes a day. That's what happens in East Jerusalem. Now, I really appreciate what is done today by the municipality of Jerusalem. Really, they do a lot. They change direction in that they care, they take responsibility. But after 50 years of negligence and avoidance, this is just a drop in the sea. Jerusalem needs a national effort if we actually want to restore it. Just one anecdote about the unification of Jerusalem. Today, 50 years on, after 67, there's not one bus line that connects a neighborhood of East Jerusalem to the west. So we annexed territories, we built for the Jews, and in fact we ignored the Palestinian population of this city. We did not make them be real residents, citizens, equal in this city. Thank you, Meir. I just want to go back to Rami for a second. Since we're talking here about Arab population of Jerusalem, and Meir described the world view of the quarters, the neighborhoods, and the self-administration, two questions I keep asking myself. Is the Arab population really a part of managing the neighborhoods? And the other thing, why don't you vote to the mayors or the council? You have an amazing electoral power. You can influence who is going to be the next mayor of Jerusalem almost. Well, actually, I don't agree, because we're talking about a very young population, 60% under 18. So in practice, it's only 12% electoral force. So practically, even if they do vote, it's not really true as far as the electoral power. Two, it's a political question, recognition of the occupation or not. That's what bothers the Palestinians for the last 50 years. And that is when the national movement was so strong, but today it lost control. But that does not cause the Palestinians to vote, for a very simple reason. People deal with their individual survival. Each of us has two worries, or three. One, to maintain your position as an inhabitant, and it's conditioned on all sorts of forms and paperwork and whatever, and where you live, and you have to pay municipality tax, and that, of course, bothers all of us. Also, medical insurance, the welfare authorities. There were cases that people became citizens, and they thought they're going to get all the rights that a citizen gets. And there was a case that I know, not even just one, that people became citizens, still they didn't get any medical health because they don't live inside Jerusalem. There's also a different reality regarding demolition injunctions. 22,000 homes. So people have to take care of the buildings and to prove that they do live in the municipal area of Jerusalem. They violated the Israeli law in order to maintain their right to be citizens. And all these buildings were built between 1996 and 2001. That's a fact. You cannot deny this fact. So the Palestinians do not deal with political participation, and their participation in the elections to the PA is also less than 5%. So it's similar to that same percentage that votes for Israeli elections. I think it's not relevant. It's not part of the Palestinian discourse. They deal with survival. They're detached from the West Bank. Some of them see themselves as part of the West Bank, not of Israel, and many other problems. Dani, I want to ask you. Some people argue that the fence, the security fence, is going to be the future border between the State of Israel and the Palestinian state. If, in fact, it does happen. What about Jerusalem? The security fence, is that the outline that will bring about the partition of the two parts of the city? Do you see that as a solution? And I'll ask you, if you could roll times back, would you replan the outline of the fence? I'm talking about the wall in Jerusalem. Well, hello everybody. Just a word beforehand regarding the question whether Jerusalem is united. Jerusalem is a mosaic, a huge mosaic of many things, and almost none of the things does not go with another, and only the connection between them and the picture, if you look back a little bit, that creates the real picture of Jerusalem. I personally believe that Jerusalem is a value which is much higher than just specific geographical borders. And today, the municipal area of Jerusalem, it's one thing, and another thing completely is what is Jerusalem. For example, in Jewish halakha, Jerusalem is what is close to the old city. So what is not close to the old city is not Jerusalem for the Jewish halakha. Definitely, there's nothing holy in some neighborhood, Zur Bacher. But the question is where the borders are going to be between Israel and the Palestinian state. It's a question of negotiations. My estimate or my understanding, I've been many years in the negotiation, there'll be a mutual interest to both sides that the border will go according to the demographic line in Jerusalem. That's an interest of Israel, that there'll be minimum Palestinians in the Israeli side, an interest of the Palestinians that there'll be maximum Palestinians on their side. There'll be a few problems. What do you do with the old city or the Holy Basin? There are all sorts of problems. You know, we know basically three formula. One, the Clinton formula from Camp David that said that all the Jewish neighborhoods are going to go to Israel, all the Arab neighborhoods are going to go to Palestine. The old city, the Jewish quarter and the wall for Israel, all the other quarters to the Palestinians. Temple Mount, above ground Palestinians, underground to Israel. This was the Clinton formula. In 2000. But if you know what's going on, of course, you cannot divide Jerusalem in this way today, definitely not the old city. And therefore, in 2008, in the negotiation of Annapolis, there was another formula, which is called the Holy Basin or Historic Basin formula, which included not just the old city, but also additional places, beginning with Mount Zion, through the city of David, Mount of Olives, and the churches around it, to create some sort of an area where all of it is not internationalization or nationalization according to the UN resolution, but as a mutual control. We developed this idea. We thought how we can go into details and create a place where there'll be a mutual control, special rules, under the auspices of 5 countries, in order to create rules by which the place can live not as a conflict, but as a place that has a potential for advancement. I'm not sure that this potential or this formula is the one that will give us the solution that all the inhabitants want in Jerusalem. This is already a political issue, a general issue, looking at Jerusalem from a step back. If we go down to the will of the people, then we can discover a completely different story. Many people in East Jerusalem, and there was the Brandeis survey, they spoke about 90% that want to remain in a solution of 2 states. They want to remain under Israeli regime, and they were asked why. And the answers were quite surprising, not just because of the economics, of course, so there's a huge gap, but also regarding the feeling of freedom and the general life. Most of the Palestinian population in East Jerusalem was born after 67. Its social comparison is not to Cairo and Amman. They compare themselves to Jerusalem and to Tel Aviv, and they want their rights, and they want to live not like in a backward city somewhere, but in a place that's developed. And therefore the question where the border is going to pass, I can ensure one thing, not where the fence is today. That can I guarantee. Meir, now these polls that Danny spoke about, I know them from the Annapolis negotiations, that most of the Arab citizens of East Jerusalem said that they'd rather be in the Israeli side of the city if in fact it's going to be divided. Is that the same today? Can we still say that that reflects the opinion of the Arab population? I would be very cautious of trusting polls and surveys. You have to take into account that people who live for so many years under a foreign regime, and for them it is, develop impressive capability to adapt their answers according to the time and place they're asked. I take a very limited way all these polls that are held in East Jerusalem. I do want to give you two insights that derive from our existence in the eastern part of the city. One, there's no question whatsoever, and that's as opposed to the past, that East Jerusalemites are not involved and they have no impact and apparently will not have an impact on the design of future arrangements in Jerusalem. But the East Jerusalemites will support and will accept that in any agreement that their representatives will be there, will obtain through negotiations with Israel. They'll accept what they will come up with. Second thing, of course, they're aware of their special status or preferred status, as Danny mentioned, and they're not enthusiastic to give up privileges that they acquired during the year. However, and I'm saying it cautiously, I think at the day of judgment, the weight of this will is not going to be so significant in the designing of the arrangement. Although, if you want to find this will, it's this idea of an open city, which sometimes they talk about as one of the options on their part for future arrangements. Here I suppose that they take into account their situation, the reality of their life in East Jerusalem. Rami, would you like to say something about this?
What the people prefer? I often wonder what the privilege is. We're losing our status in favor of Ramallah. Life is better in Ramallah. But I'd like to mention something objectively. The IPCC and the Friedrich Ebert Institution did a survey in January 2014, and there are indeed people, 83% of them, that Jerusalem today is strengthening its connection with Israel and the western part of the city. From among them, more than 50% are calling this a process of Israelization. This is January 2014. Of course, the establishment of the fence, and you have to bear in mind that Jerusalem is the nucleus of the Ramallah was once a satellite city of Jerusalem, as was Bethlehem, and so they're changing the order and they're turning their back on Jerusalem in every direction and wondering why the Palestinians are confused. There's another survey that we carried out in October 2014 during the period of the events in July 2014. This was before the war in Gaza. And so 67% said that they believed that there was a very strong withdrawal in the process of strengthening the connection with Israel and the western part of the city. 25% said that there was some withdrawal, but it was not a strong one, and 44% said they were boycotting Israeli products and were no longer using the privilege of being in Israel by going to malls and the public expense, and 70% were still using the health services. So the reality is much more difficult and complex. Jerusalem does not belong only to the to the internal Israeli discourse. There's another nation. There are 1 million Palestinians living in the metropolis, or living there at least before the fence was built, and we have to relate differently to this strange bird known as Jerusalem, which is not a priority of the establishment or the city or any other party. Thank you, Rami. David, I have a question to you. There are always complaints in the establishment regarding the involvement of the PA in Jerusalem and their intervention in the population and in the administration. Do we indeed see such intervention? I would like to relate in a few words to previous claims made regarding public transportation. As Meir said, I'd like to discuss the dynamics of the light rail in Jerusalem. The light rail goes all the way from Mount Herzl to Pisgat Ze'ev, and it goes through Jewish and Arab neighborhoods. One of the things we insisted on most clearly and most insistently in the past year was that the light rail not go off its route, and that it continue working all the time, and that Jewish and Arab residents be able to continue to use it in an ongoing basis. Meir discussed the matter of transportation from the east to the west of the city, and the light rail, as far as I see it, is a symbol of the dynamic of joint life. The joint life in Jerusalem does not end with the light rail. All those who are familiar with the health services in Jerusalem, those who are familiar with the development of Bet Hanina and Shoafat, and they will see Jews shopping in Arab neighborhoods, in Arab shopping centers, and vice versa. The dynamic that is created, both as far as transportation is concerned, as well as commercial practices and shared services. There were problems in the past year, but I see a recovery. I'm not going to say there aren't any gaps. There are gaps. And this may be the core of the issue. The question is what you do with those gaps. And on this matter, I disagree with Rami when he says that East Jerusalem is not at the core of the city's activities. It is that we don't have Arab council members. There isn't a political lobby that pressures the mayor to add budgets to the eastern city. I can tell you that in 2004, 26 million shekels was the budget for development of the east in the city. In 2014, it was 180 to 200 million. But there's no political lobby that's applying pressure on the mayor to increase the development budgets and resources. The subject of the eastern part of the city is at the core of the focus of the city, because these are not foreigners. These are people that the mayor's office is open to, that the mayor comes to, and it's a very clear approach that says that these people in Jerusalem, as far as their perspective, these are people who should have equal rights, and we want to bring them to that place. As far as the involvement of Arab residents in the decisions of the city, the first thing in setting policy for planning and building, or for the development of medical services in the Arab communities, the question is what the community wants, what the neighborhood wants. He works the same way in the Jewish sector and the Arab sector. He goes to the representatives of the community administrations and the leaders of the community and asks them what their philosophy is, what they want, and this is a very important approach, although I agree there is a certain political Rubicon, as Rami said, regarding the recognition of Israeli authorities, and because of the situation they are unable to cross that Rubicon. Regarding the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian Authority is involved very strongly on the declarative level in East Jerusalem, and much less so on actually taking care of the interests of the population. It does work with the Israeli authorities, and it works in different ways in involvement in institutions. Based on my personal experience, I experience interfaces with all kinds of people who have affairs with the Palestinian Authority. In the interface that I encounter, I see a great deal of disappointment from with the Palestinian Authority in these areas, and the range that came up here in some of the surveys, and what I'm familiar with regarding the increase in the number of people who are interested in the Israeli track or getting Israeli citizenship, this does not come from a level of Israeli identity, but rather a recognition of the advantages that lie on the Israeli side, and no less so, this is connected to the disappointment that they feel with the Palestinian Authority, and I hear this in my discussions with the Palestinian residents. I'd like to once again raise the question that we asked you to vote on. I'd like you to again put the question on the screen. I'd like to remind you that the number is not +972 but 055, and until the question comes up and the audience will be asked to vote on this matter that we've just spoken about, I'd like to, you see the question and you're familiar with it. Is Jerusalem united? Yes, partially, and no. We had in the past year an eruption of terrorist activity in Jerusalem, and we're seeing a trend that some call terror on the part of lone wolves who absorb the atmosphere and the incitement, and we saw an eruption of terror attacks following the past summer. I'd like to ask you, we'll start with you, Danny, what caused it to stop, first of all? And secondly, what can we anticipate in the coming year? Is this genuine quiet, or is it a false quiet? In my opinion, we should distinguish between events, what we call disorder or riots, which began as a form of protest, which we protest using illegitimate tools, but this was a civil protest on the part of the population, Arab population in Jerusalem. We should distinguish that from terrorist attacks, which come from the same background. In those disorders, riot and terror attacks, we must see the involvement not only of people from Jerusalem, but those who come from outside. What the mayor said is very true, that some of these things come from the younger generation. Bear in mind that the model of courage of the young people is the Intifada, the first and second of their parents, and they view that as a model for what they view as something that they don't belong to. I think that the main problem is not what the mayor said here, and not even in the infrastructures. The main problem is that of hope and a sense of belonging. The moment there will be a sense of belonging on the part of the people of Jerusalem to the system, to what is happening, to their responsibility to run their lives, even if they don't get political independence, but do get something similar, in my opinion, the moment there will be more identification with the system, this type of activity will decrease. It's very easy to point one's anger at the Israeli population. It's very easy to harm the light rail as the symbol of everything. But ultimately, dealing with these things things is, first of all, everything that has been said here on what the city of Jerusalem is doing, and it does a great deal. And the most important thing, in my opinion, is to find the hope and identity and identification of the people of East Jerusalem with their lifestyle. Meir, would you like to add something? Yes. In light of the fact that this eruption has died down to a certain extent now, we should understand how it erupted, and I'd like to give you a brief explanation. Beyond the national aspirations and issues of religion, the difficult socioeconomic state of the population is what underlay the protest in the summer. We should listen to the Palestinians. We should hear what the Abu Khudair family said. After the first statement about the tragedy that happened to them, what did they say about their lives? What land had been taken from them, what road had been destroyed, and so on and so forth. It's very important to understand this is the volatile infrastructure of the city, and in that volatile infrastructure there are certain sparks. So if there is tension between Jews and Arabs, there's one spark, and of course the Jewish settlement in Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, that's another spark, and of course the tension on the Temple Mount. These are sparks that exist all the time within a very volatile situation. Igniting these sparks causes the volatile potential of the city to be expressed. And what happened here, and it's important to understand, and I accept what Danny said and what the mayor said, the population of East Jerusalem doesn't want war. It wants to raise its children. It wants to send them to school. How surprising, just like ours, just like we do. It wants them to be able to learn and play just like we do. And their feeling is of discrimination on a very deep level. Even if we take the matter of the settlement of Jews in Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem, we, the Israelis, argue among ourselves, is this something that prevents the future division of the city or not? And that's a question. But according to the Arab population, the meaning of Jews settling in East Jerusalem is that not only you're not letting us build, not only did you take our property from the other side of the 48 line and you won't give it back. Now you're going to take our homes away on our side. We have to understand what that is sitting on. Therefore, the right treatment and indeed a genuine effort, and I understand my good friend David, who's trying to explain what's happening in the city in Jerusalem, what the city is doing, which, as I said, are limited steps as far as the city is able, but the reality goes far beyond the capabilities of the city. And if we don't all enlist to improve the state of the eastern part of the city, then we will keep seeing these kind of events. Thank you very much. Could we see the results of the survey, please? Apparently not. Here it is. So these results are quite similar to the results that you voted before we started the session. In other words, we didn't convince you to change your views. I think it shows what the views of the panel regarding Jerusalem. Thank you, Rami. We appreciate your participation, Danny, Meir, and David. And I hope that you will all continue working for Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is important to all of us.